Hey everyone. This week on the podcast, Brittni and I are diving into Ayurvedic tongue analysis. So, in Ayurvedic medicine, the tongue is really considered a window into our health, and we can learn so much about our digestive strength, toxin buildup, predominant qualities like whether we're experiencing excess heat or dryness or dampness, as well as the state of our inner organs just by looking at our tongue. So you're definitely going to want to find a mirror for this one and take a peek at your tongue so that you can follow along as we're diving into what the different colors and cracks and bumps and coatings all mean. And we'll also be talking about the ancient practice of tongue scraping and why it's supportive for a lot more than just oral health. So thanks so much for listening, and be sure to listen to the end of this one. I share my story with panchakarma when my tongue turned completely black. It's a wild story. You don't want to miss that one. And if you do enjoy the episode, we'd really love if you could leave us a comment or review on whatever platform you're listening on and tell us why. It really helps us spread the word. So thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Ayurveda for Women's Health podcast, where we simplify ancient Ayurvedic wisdom into practical guidance for everyday life. Between the overwhelming wellness trends, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice out there, we return to a science that has been around for thousands of years. I'm Rita, an Ayurvedic health counselor.
And I'm Brittni, an Ayurveda practitioner. In a world that disconnects us from our bodies, we are here to guide you back. Through body literacy, practical tools, and time-tested science, we will help you step boldly into a more empowered, aligned version of yourself. So let's dive in. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Views expressed do not represent our employers.
This past weekend, we did a fire at the house. We had a bunch of brush piles that needed to be burned through. We'd taken down a couple trees and cleared out some parts of our land over the last year. And so we had this fire, and of course, I was thinking a ton about Ayurveda and the elements and the doshas, because some of the brush that we were burning was older and drier and burned really easily and kind of got the fire going. And then other brush was heavier and newer and damper. And it was kind of this dance like between the two of not putting too much of that on the fire at once. So yeah, of course, I'm thinking about Ayurveda and thinking about the doshas and thinking about Agni. And for anyone who has that familiarity with Ayurveda, you may know that Agni means digestive strength, but it really translates as digestive fire. And Ayurveda is always using this parallel of the fire to understand digestion. And so, yeah, as we were doing this fire, I was thinking of all of these parallels to digestion, what I see in clients. And like at one point, I had put too much of the damper, newer material on, and the fire started to dampen, and then the smoke got really thick. And so I'm like saying to my husband, like, oh yeah, so this is like what happens when you eat too heavy of a meal and you don't have the digestive strength, and you get heavy and like feel bloated and overly full and uncomfortable and gassy. Like the smoke, that's like the gas. And he was like nodding his head and like, yeah, keep putting stuff on the fire. But yeah, I think it's such a nice parallel to one, seeing nature in our own bodies, but two, really understanding digestion and how often we tend to look at the food and look at like, oh, I don't know why this meal made me feel uncomfortable after, where we're not always considering our individual fire, our digestive strength, and how compatible that is with the meal that we're eating. And if the meal is a little bit too dense, too heavy, similar to that brush, whether that means it's really indulgent meal like a pizza, or it's even just a really nutrient dense meal, like it has a lot of fats and proteins and nuts and seeds and meats and foods that maybe in combination are heavy, and our individual Agni or individual digestive strength's a little lower for countless number of reasons, that can be really what causes that indigestion. So yeah, I thought that would be a good thing to talk about on here, and maybe really relevant for our conversation today too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I love that you said that because I'm always looking at like the same thing. I'm having the same thought process as I'm just out and about on a hike or a run or out in the garden or something. I mean, Ayurveda is everywhere. It's understanding these concepts of how our body is nature and it's going to respond in the same way. So, yeah, I think that's such a great example and it's something that we both see in our practice, right? And have experience at different points with our own bodies
For sure.
in the same way, right? And knowing it's not necessarily the food, but it's the function of your Agni or your system at that time. So it's all of the things. It's not just one thing. It is kind of that whole consideration, that holistic perspective of why you might be feeling a certain way. And obviously goes great with what we're talking about today when we're talking about tongues, because this is another area that we can look to see what's going on inside the body. And I think I really love how Ayurveda shares about tongue knowledge and allows us to connect with this organ in our body that is very overlooked. I think we know to look at our nails or our hair, our skin, right? We can see there's imbalances. And I think that's kind of becoming, quote, more mainstream to like check for an imbalance or something going on internally. But we're not really taught to look at our tongues, and our tongues can be this other way of giving us information of what's going on inside, not just for the mouth, but for the entire body and other organ systems specifically. So we'll get into that in detail, but it is such a great place to begin, especially when you are learning Ayurveda, because the tongue can give us so much information in such a small area. So yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. For anyone who hasn't listened to the episodes, we talked about this. My second career, or I guess my original career, I'm a medical speech language pathologist and work primarily in hospital settings with that. And so between that job and my Ayurveda practice, I look at so many tongues. And it's always so fascinating because, yeah, as you were saying, the tongue is a map of our inner organs and a mirror of what's going on in our inner organs. And so we can gauge such information on our digestion, on our body's ability to detoxify, on, specific organs in the body just from looking at the tongue, and also use it to gauge progress and see, if we are doing some work in our digestion and see some changes in the tongue. It's like all things in the body. It's something that's going to change every day. So it's something where it can just be this checkpoint that you can look at your tongue every morning. I'm sure we'll talk about tongue scraping and that whole practice in here today too. And it's just another way that we can communicate with our body and check in with our body. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's different. Looking at the tongue is different in Western medicine than it is in Eastern medicine, right? And so, yeah,
sure.
I'm sure Rita has a lot of insights to that. I have looked at a lot of tongues in my practice and through school too, right? In clinic, I have looked at a lot of client cases and their tongues, and it is so fascinating to see what's going on the outside, or like what their chief complaints or imbalances are, and then look at the tongue and be like, oh yeah, like this is connecting a lot of dots for other areas of the body. And I had one client that I had asked to see their tongue. This was an in-person consultation. And, they stuck out their tongue and said, like the way that you would in Western medicine. And I kind of laughed to myself because I didn't even think of that. But that's not what we're looking at in Ayurveda, right? It's not like looking at the tonsils, I think is why you do that. You kind of like stick out your tongue and say, so you don't need to do that in Ayurveda, but looking at the tongue is going to be giving us a little bit of different information in what we're looking at. Because again, we use the 5 elements. And so we can start to see those showing up on the tongue in different ways. So we'll go into more detail about that and hopefully some, little tidbits that you can look at for yourself and look at your tongue and be like, oh yeah, this is where I can start, making some tweaks or adjustments and like make some simple changes. Like to your point, Rita, at the beginning of this, maybe it is starting with, oh, maybe my Agni needs a little boost right now, which is probably something that most of us often can experience. So yeah, and I'll add this disclaimer now because my husband makes fun of me where he catches me sometimes if there's a photo of you online sticking out your tongue, I'm definitely zooming in to look at your tongue in more detail. And I've been like on my phone before looking at photos that I've come across of people sticking out their tongue and sharing it online because it gives us so much information. It's fascinating. So if you stick out your tongue and you post a picture, I'm going to look at it for sure.
I mean, it's intimate, right? Once you learn what Ayurveda teaches us about the tongue, it's an intimate thing to show someone your tongue. It's like showing you a map of what's going on in your body. But no, I hear you. I do the same for sure. And circling back to what you were saying about what Western medicine has to say about the tongue, I have a couple of wild tongue stories that perhaps I'll try to sprinkle into this episode. So maybe I'll start with one before we even get in here.
Love stories.
Yeah. So this is before I found Ayurveda. I was working at a hospital where I was helping to implement a standardized swallow screening protocol with the nursing team for new stroke admission patients. And so I was down in a conference room, was teaching a quick lecture on this protocol, and then people were breaking off into pairs and practicing it on each other. And it was an odd number. So I teamed up with this nurse. And the first step in the protocol is to open up, stick out your tongue and say, ah. And so I did that to her direction and immediately just clocked this look on her face that was kind of like a, whoa, what's going on there kind of expression. And I can't remember if I asked her about it or if there was just this like very palpable, awkward tension as she was doing the protocol with me. And then immediately ran into the bathroom and stuck out my tongue in the mirror and very clearly saw what she was looking at, which was that I had white coating on my tongue, like pretty thickly covering my tongue. And I immediately called my doctor. This was a while ago, probably like maybe 12 years ago, 11 years ago, somewhere around there. And yeah, called my doctor, made the appointment. My primary care doctor essentially thought that it could be thrush, which is a yeast overgrowth in the mouth, similar to where we can have a yeast overgrowth in our vaginal microbiome. You can also have that happen in your oral microbiome. So she told me she thought it was thrush and would test it. She did a swab test. And if it was, then she would prescribe an antifungal pharmaceutical to clear it out. And the test came back and it was negative. And so I was like, okay, well, what is causing this then? This is alarming to me. And essentially, she said that, well, it could be a different type of bacteria or fungus or something that we didn't test for. I would just try the nystatin antifungal medication anyway to see if that works. And I did, and it didn't work because it wasn't a fungal overgrowth. And meanwhile was in this like spiral of anxiety for what was causing it. And then I can't remember, it was probably like a year or so after that, that I ended up finding Ayurveda and finding this very long explanation as to why I had the white coating on my tongue, which we will explain in this episode. And yeah, fortunately was able to work on my digestion, which if you've listened to prior episodes, you know it was in a pretty bad place back then, but work through my digestion and work through my body's ability to detoxify. And I haven't had a white coating like that for very long time. But yeah, I think it's really common that people can see things on their tongue. And in Western medicine, there are certain labels. There's this concept of a geographic tongue, or there's even a label of like black hairy tongue. But oftentimes it stops at that label. It's more describing that phenomena, where in Ayurveda, every crack, every color, every coating, every change in color and texture there's a meaning for that. So we're going to keep it relatively high level in going through that today because it's a really deep science, one that I think you and I are both very much still learning. And I think you could study tongue analysis for the rest of your life, truly. For sure. But something that I'm hoping we can portray to people and really have it be something that could feel empowering to understand your body on a deeper level.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, hopefully everyone goes and looks at their tongue after after listening to this. And yeah, it's just so fascinating the difference between the systems too, from an understanding of why it's showing up as opposed to, oh, it's just there, let's give it medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that wasn't what it was in your case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think this conversation will help clarify some of these things that people see on their tongue and are thinking they need a diagnosis where there really isn't necessarily maybe one there. Maybe there is in some situations, but I'd say often what we're going to talk about today, these signs that you might see, a little bit of, care and some adjustments like might make a big difference and bring your tongue back to that, healthy state of balance. So yeah, it's fascinating. And we all, to your point, like everyone has some level of ama, right? Even practitioners and doctors have it, Ayurvedic doctors and practitioners. It's a matter of paying attention and not just like setting it and forgetting it with things that come to your body or your food or your choices or like how you're doing things. And hopefully this conversation helps clarify that relative to what you're seeing on your tongue.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anyone didn't listen to our digestion series episode, just where you threw out the word ama there, ama you can translate as toxins, or I think metabolic waste is the translation I tend to use the most. So really, that might be a good prerequisite for some of this conversation, is understanding that when we aren't digesting in our body, we create this metabolic waste, this toxin, this ama. And yeah, I think just reiterating what you just said, that we all are going to have some level of that at different points in life. And I think for me, Ayurveda has really helped me break away from this binary understanding of health, that we're either healthy and everything's great, or like we're sick and there's something wrong with us. But really, everything in the body is in flux, everything's moving. And that's true with our toxin levels, with our ama, with our metabolic waste levels in the bodies. So yeah, good disclaimer to not let this episode be something that stirs up more anxiety when you're looking at your tongue. You're going to find something going on there, and more just something you can be curious with and learn how to work with.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, maybe let's start by diving into the constitutional differences, since if you've listened to some of our other episodes, we do talk about these 3 different ways that Ayurveda looks at different body types, right? So Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And those can show up in structure and color and shape and size. So before we get into the imbalances of what you might see, so Vatas, considering that we're talking about the air and space qualities here, so you're going to see a thinner, smaller, drier type tongue, because that's where that space and air qualities are showing up. A Pitta type tongue is going to be more medium sized. This is the fire and water element of Pitta that we're talking about. So you're going to see a more medium sized tongue and maybe some more redness and maybe even pointy, right? We see this sharpness with Pitta, and that can show up as like a very pointy type tongue. It's interesting when you start looking at different shapes of tongues too. Like you said, we've both seen a lot of different tongues, and it's amazing the shapes and the thickness and the size. Like, it's not just imbalanced, but it is that uniqueness of tongues look so different. And so now everyone's going to go out there and start looking at everyone's tongues, and you'll really start to notice it. And then the last one, the third one, is Kapha, which is earth and water. So we're looking at a broader size, a larger size, maybe even a thicker type tongue. It's going to be maybe lighter in color, and it can be more pinkish and wet in quality, because that earth quality may show up as having more lubrication in the mouth and on the tongue. So yeah, anything you want to add to those, or any observations that you've had in seeing different tongues?
I think just that sometimes it can help to differentiate someone's constitution if I'm a little on the fence. that sometimes when you look at someone's tongue, and again, when you were describing the Pitta tongue, like the red, medium-sized, pointier tongue, I can think of a couple instances where I was trying to differentiate someone's constitution versus imbalances and then looked at the tongue and was like, oh, that's a Pitta tongue. Okay. So, yeah, I think it can be just another tool in figuring that out if your constitution isn't super clear.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So using the tongue can be a way to figure out your constitution. I think a lot of times how we're using the tongue clinically is looking at tongue mapping, and there's a representation of certain organs in our body. And this is where things get really interesting. And I think this is one of those episodes where I'd love to have a visual associated. So maybe in our Patreon, we can add a little Ayurvedic tongue map. But essentially, if we break the tongue into looking at the front versus the middle versus the back of the tongue, the front of the tongue is really indicative of the upper part of the body. So we're going to see the heart and the lungs, and the lungs are kind of on the sides of the front, and the heart is really towards the front center. And then behind that, in more of the middle part of this tongue, we'll see the middle parts of the body. We'll see the stomach and the pancreas and the spleen and the liver. And then going a little further back, in the very back center, we see the intestines, and the back sides, we see the kidneys. And so how that works is when we see like certain coding, if it's more, let's say, just in the back center, that can be an indication of that extra coating we'll talk about, that's ama. That can be an indication that there's more ama in the intestines if we're not seeing that in the other parts of the tongue. So coating and discolorations and cracks and things like that, where that is located on the tongue, can actually give us more information.
Yeah, super helpful. And I like to think about it as the tongue is kind of this like upside down body. So just the tip, you're starting with like the top of the body and working your way down. And I would also add that in the top of the area too, we're looking at like the throat and the brain, right? So like the whole head area above the heart and the lungs too. And I've seen that a lot too. You can have like thyroid indications, and you can see things going on with the heart in more depth. And the mind, especially, I've seen a lot if there's like a lot of anxiety or anger going on in the mind, and the mind is like really leading the body. You can see that on the tongue. There's, either redness, or there's dryness there, or there's some cracks there. So, and we'll talk about all those things. But yeah, I think that the tip of the tongue, I've seen a lot of that in imbalances that are very common. But yeah, I like to think about it as that starting with the top of the body and working your way down as you're looking into the mouth.
Yeah.
Really helpful.
Yeah. No, thank you for adding that. I forgot that. And I will just say too, something else I find fascinating when we're breaking down this map of the tongue, traditional Chinese medicine, completely separate system of medicine to Ayurveda, but very similar tongue map, which to me is really fascinating, that these very separate Eastern medicine practices have mapped out the tongue in a very similar way. There are a couple differences, but there's a whole lot of overlap.
Yeah.
So yeah, very fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. I do have some books on Ayurveda tongue and Chinese medicine tongue, and there are some differences in them, but a lot of similarities in how Chinese medicine is also looking at the elements and how they show up. Yeah. So we're talking about wind, and we're talking about heat, and how they can show up in these different organs.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe the first thing we can talk about is the coding piece that we've mentioned a couple times. Let you guys know what was going on with with my very white tongue back then. So coding in general, when we think of this layer on top of the tongue that can actually come off if you're scraping at it, coding is an indication of ama. Ama being, again, metabolic waste or toxin buildup in the body. And like we said, it could be in a certain area of the tongue. It could be across the whole tongue. If we're seeing it on the whole tongue, that's going to be considered more severe. And then when we look at the color of that coating, that can give us some more information specifically. So in general, when we see white coating, we think of that as ama, and particularly if we see a certain tinge to that coating, you could think of it as a specific doshic ama. So like a brown or black tinge is going to be more of a Vata ama, or a yellow tinge to that coating is more of a Pitta ama, whereas the white, pure white coating is more of a Kapha ama. And it's normal that we're all going to have a little bit of light coating on the tongue. Like when you go and scrape your tongue in the morning and you have a little bit of that coming off, that's to be expected. The body is regularly creating and removing metabolic waste. It's part of what makes the body so darn amazing. But when you're seeing that really build up and it's remaining even after you're scraping and it is thicker, that's going to be, the thicker it is, the more pronounced it is, that's an indication of higher levels of that metabolic waste and ama in the body.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good distinction because in the morning, everyone's going to have a little bit of that coating when you wake up. And that's why it can be helpful to like not start drinking something right away and scrape your tongue, right? So we'll talk about that because that you want to remove that waste that the body has worked really hard overnight to like push to this channel where it can be eliminated, which is the top of the tongue. And so this is why tongue scraping is really revered in Ayurveda of taking care of your whole body and your digestion. So yeah, that's a really helpful distinction where if you're like scraping and scraping and scraping and scraping, which you don't necessarily want to do. If you scrape a couple times and it's not coming off, then that's a sign that there's some ama there. And then looking at the color, just like you're describing, Rita, can help give us even more information, like that next step of information, like, okay, is this more of a heat type, an inflammatory type, right? Then we're thinking that yellowish, like Pitta type. Is this more of a dry Vata type, or is this a Kapha heavy, like wet, white type? And so it's interesting. You'll see color in Ayurveda in all capacities. And so using it as information, we talk about mucus coming out of our nose. Well, what color is it? Right? We talk about our bowel movements. Well, what color is it? Right? So color is really helpful in understanding these functions and imbalances that are taking place in the body and what elements might be present along with them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me want to go on so many tangents.
I'm sure.
So many different ways we can, again, receive this communication from the body. Yeah. But I will stay on the topic of tongues. But I'm glad that you mentioned that and that color piece because I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm refraining as well. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about doshic indications, right? So what are we actually seeing on our tongue in terms of imbalances that might be showing up? And, cracks, right? If we're thinking about air and space, air is very irregular and mobile and, moving in all different directions at different times. I have a lot of cracks on my tongue. So I had a lot of Vata imbalance going on throughout childhood and through a lot of my life, which I, didn't know at the time, but now understand. And so the cracks that are on my tongue are an indication of that long-standing Vata. And so I'm not always having a Vata imbalance that I'm trying to address because I'm looking at my tongue, but there is this understanding, and this is why an intake can be very long when we have, see clients, because we do want to understand that history. Is that Vata something that was long-standing, or is that something going on recently? So in my situation, I have cracks that are right down in the middle of my tongue, but like very irregular, like a hard line. They're just kind of a little squiggly. But I know that was from growing up. That was like a lot of the Vata imbalance. So there can be a difference is it changing every day as you're addressing it, or is it something that's been there your whole life, most of your life, and you've seen it all the time? So yeah, cracks can be that indication of excess dryness, right? If it's not something long-standing, it could be, simply drier tissue in the body. And going back to the locations you're describing, Rita, we can look again, like, is it at the top, in the middle, or the bottom? So yeah, cracks are a really interesting one when you start to see them on tongues, because they can show up in different in the different places. And then, well, I've also seen this a lot too, like a center and midline crack going right down the length of the tongue or a section of the tongue, but in kind of that straighter line. That's also Vata, but we're looking more at the spine area, right? So we can see people that have a lot of, weight on their shoulders or carrying a lot. They can have that resting on their spine. And not to get too far into the weeds with going down that, rabbit hole of what we could talk about, there is that emotional component too. I think that's the important piece of it, right? It's not always a physical imbalance, but that emotional imbalance can show up in these physical places. So yeah, a deep line or crack down the middle of the tongue can be very common. And then getting more into like a Pitta type imbalance that you might see, or a heat imbalance, a fire imbalance, we're looking at raised red bumps. And that I've seen a lot of tongues like around the tip, around the sides as well. You can see it, the whole thing could have a lot of inflammation on it. So seeing where those the redness is showing up, or where the bumps are showing up. And then ridges or teeth marks. This is really common too. I used to have this pretty badly, but like pre-Ayurveda, before I understood. That really is an indication of when you see these ridges along the edges, it's kind of like scalloped edges. You can see this indentation from the teeth on the tongue. That is a sign of malabsorption. So I'm curious your thoughts on this with the malabsorption. I think about it as the tongue is deficient. Like that organ is deficient and it's showing up in that tissue as not having enough, which is what we think of with malabsorption. So, and then the last one I'll call out is swelling and kind of a wet coating on the tongue. It's interesting when you notice dry versus wet tongue. If you look at a lot of tongues, you can really start to see the difference. It's so fascinating. But a wet tongue, we're seeing more of that earth and water quality being present. And so that can be the body is holding on to more water. And that could indicate that maybe the kidney is a little bit imbalanced. And that would be an area you could start to look at. So depending if the whole tongue has a lot of liquid on it, or if it looks very wet, or if it's just in different areas, that can give us more information as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview for some of the most common patterns that we can see. And when we're seeing excess Pitta, when we're seeing excess Kapha, when we're seeing excess Vata. And I definitely see that in both of my careers and looking at tongues. It's interesting. I'll notice very often in a lot of patients who are having a lot of constipation that we'll see that like really dry, cracked tongue quite a bit. And more of the hospital side of what I do, I've actually noticed with a lot of stroke patients that are in the hospital for an acute stroke, I'll see a lot of Pitta. And it's a lot of cases where the stroke was caused from hypertension or hemorrhagic bleed, or things that we think of as having a Vata involvement, but definitely a big Pitta involvement. I'll see like very, very bright red tongues, a lot of those like raised red bumps, like you mentioned there. So yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to see the patterns and be able to get the information that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so fascinating. I feel like if someone just sent me a picture of their tongue, you can kind of get the snapshot before even, going through the whole intake, which is why I, ask for it in photos of getting it from clients, because it's so fascinating. Yeah, I guess any other thoughts that come to mind in terms of like what you see, or any indications that we didn't talk about?
Well, maybe I'll share my Panchakarma story.
Sure. Yeah.
About some of the wild things that my tongue went through when I did a Panchakarma. Because I think I shared those pictures with you.
You did.
And it was pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like Panchakarma deserves its own episode at some point. But for those who aren't familiar, Panchakarma is a very specific type of cleanse, a very extensive detoxification program that you do in Ayurvedic medicine, that essentially is all about helping to dislodge toxins from the tissues in the body and remove them from the body in a certain way. And so when I did it through the Ayurvedic Center of Vermont. They had a really incredible program there, and it allowed me to do a section at home, and then went to the clinic for part of it and received different body work. And part of the program when I was doing it at home is I was drinking gradually increasing quantities of medicated ghee. And that medicated ghee is helping to dislodge some of the ama, some of the toxin from my tissues. And so I was, usually I do look at my tongue when I'm scraping my tongue every day and that kind of thing. It was maybe like the day before, 2 days before I was going to the actual clinic. So I'd been doing all of this work at home. I've been doing this mono diet of khichdi, drinking the herbal ghee. I was doing a lot of self body work. And one day I looked at my tongue and it was black. And fortunately, I knew what that was. Otherwise, I think I would have thought I was dying. It was pretty wild to see. And I did reach out to the Ayurvedic doctor I was working with, and she reaffirmed that that was Vata ama that was leaving my tissues and therefore currently circulating in the body. And part of what you do when you're doing a panchakarma is you're helping to move out the toxins, and then depending on who you are, there's different ways that we're working to remove them. So oftentimes, like part of that process for me is I did drink some castor oil as a laxative to really flush and move that out. I did herbal enemas to also flush that out. And so along this process, at one point, the tongue was black when the Vata ama was circulating. And then as that was removed through those processes I just described, the black tongue was completely gone. Like it came, was there for a couple days, and then it fully remediated. And then towards the latter part of the panchakarma, the coating, I developed some yellow coating on the tongue. And it was like the Vata ama had moved out and now some Pitta ama was moving out. And fortunately, by the end of the panchakarma, my tongue was back into a nice, lovely, like light pink normal color. But it was a really wild experience to see that transition and through that process. And yeah, I think for me, just like really locked in some of this understanding of why that discoloration can happen. And I think just going back to that initial conversation that like we all have toxins that are rooted into our tissues, and that sometimes in certain circumstances, deeper programs like panchakarma can be really supportive in helping to remove things. Not that everyone needs a panchakarma. It's like a very specialized, specific thing, but really, really, really powerful part of Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah, it is. It is a beautiful process, and it needs to be approached very thoughtfully and intentionally. And just reiterating that what you're saying is this isn't like, oh, great, I have some ama, I'm going to go do a panchakarma, right?
No.
It's like panchakarma has a place and a time and a specific use. And yeah, we'll have to have a conversation specifically about panchakarma. But I think the piece that's really important about this story that you're sharing is like the process you were going through was loosening up that ama from these tissues. It's kind of like lubricating it and loosening it, and then you are giving it this path to exit through the therapies that you're doing, right? And so something that we talk about very often is abhyanga. It mobilizes, and then it gives it this channel to easily move out of the body by moving toxins to your digestive tract. So that's why we're always coming back to focusing on how is your digestion, because if those toxins don't have a way to move out of the body, they're going to stay stuck. Or in other cases, which I haven't experienced this with clients, but I have an instructor that has experienced this with clients at a Panchakarma center. And she described it as if you don't have a clear path for those toxins to move out, like the digestive tract, it will mobilize and move to another area of the body, right? And then start creating disruption there. So this is why we always talk about digestion as being so, so, so important. Start there if you're not sure where to start. And hopefully this tongue conversation helps add some light to that as well, because we all have toxins in our body, right? It's just impossible not to in the way that our life is and like how the nature of how we live, and it's just how it goes. And so we have these tools and these practices that can support moving toxins out of our body in a daily way. Like the body is designed to detoxify. We don't have to go to panchakarma to remove toxins. There's a time and a place for that specifically. But these daily practices like tongue scraping is a part of this detoxification process. So thank you for sharing that story. I think it's so helpful and is such a great example of toxins can just build up, right? And if we're not maintaining these daily rituals or dinacharya to help keep things moving steadily and easily, they can very easily accumulate in the other direction. So, super powerful. And those pictures, you sent me the pictures of your tongue. I was like, wow, I'd never seen a tongue like that before. It's incredible. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Very fascinating. A little alarming when it's your own tongue, but very fascinating. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I very much trusted the team I was working with.
Yeah.
So, but no, I think all that you said there, very important. And thinking about, again, we're not trying to add paranoia, but thinking about these daily practices that we can do that are supporting toxin removal in the body and metabolic waste removal in the body. And tongue scraping is such a big one. You know, it's such a foundational practice that sometimes I forget to bring it up with clients because I just kind of assume everyone does it. And totally. I actually just recently switched over my template so it's automatically included because it's something I never want to forget to bring up with a client. It's so foundational. But essentially this process of each morning, you mentioned earlier, before you drink anything, before you eat anything, maybe use the bathroom, but then really one of the first things is scraping your tongue. So using a tongue scraper where, well, first off, making sure it's not a plastic tongue scraper. I've seen those. They actually exist, and that's wild. Don't add more microplastics to your tongue. But traditionally, oftentimes what people will find locally is a stainless steel tongue scraper. So you're running the water, you're scraping from back to front, you're rinsing that under the water, you're scraping again. And I think the number of scrapes that you do can fluctuate. I'd say I probably do 3 to 5. How many scrapes would you say you usually do?
I do like 1 to 3.
Okay. Yeah. I always get a little overzealous with things, but
fair.
around like somewhere in between the two. Yeah. And usually it's that once a day in the morning, and then you would brush your teeth. And if you are doing like oil pulling, I tend to do that after. My order tends to be scraping, brushing, oil pulling. Is that yours as well?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll oil pull and then brush depending on how I'm feeling, but usually it's scrape, oil pull, and then brush is how I do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the benefits, we can look at it from different levels. There are a lot of holistic dentists out there that are currently talking about tongue scraping from an oral microbiome level and how it can remove debris and support better breath and better oral health and actually enhance the sense of taste when we're scraping our tongue. So lots of benefits specific to the oral microbiome, but it's deeper than that too. And when we think of everything that we talked about in terms of how this tongue is this map and there's this correlation with the other organs, Ayurveda thinks about it that we're massaging these organs when we're doing that tongue scrape. We're like helping to stimulate them and wake them up first thing in the morning. And so, yes, we're removing the ama because we don't want to just swallow that back down. Like you said earlier, the body does so much work to move ama, to move metabolic waste to all of our orifices overnight, including our tongue. We're helping the body to remove it. We're massaging and waking up those inner organs. And just such a foundational part of supporting our overall health.
Yeah, and it sounds so simple. As you're describing that, I'm just thinking like, how lucky are we that these are the recommendations we get to give our clients, right? It's like, like it's so simple in that like it's allowing your body to do what it's meant to do. It's not something that we're adding, harmful chemicals. We get to offer these practices that are very much in alignment with the natural function and flow of these systems. So I think it's just really special to explore tongue scraping. And it's something that, it's to your point, I don't even think about it anymore because it has become like, oh yeah, that's just what I do, right? That's I don't think about it as something that I'm like, oh, I have to do this thing. It's like, oh, cool. I'm going to go look at my tongue again. Like, what's going on in there? So yeah, I think it's a fun way to begin to connect with these practices and like start that morning, ritual and that routine of having that dinacharya and checking in with yourself.
Yeah.
And to your point too, it is that massage piece, right? It's waking up digestion. So especially if you're someone that has, oh, I'm not hungry until later, like I have sluggish bowels in the morning, things don't really move for a while, this can be a great place to start and see if it makes a difference, because we are waking up the whole digestive tract, which is connected to your tongue. So it's a great place to start. And I also wanted to go back to something you were saying in terms of the tongue and mouth microbiome. There has been more research out there that I've seen in modern science, the connection between dental care and cardiovascular disease. And so oil pulling, tongue scraping, all of these practices that Ayurveda has known for thousands of years, we'll say it again, is starting to show up in modern science, that proper oral care like these practices can help prevent something like cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, it's all connected. It's all connected. And yeah, I think I just really liked what you said about how it can be such a nice, simple practice that doesn't take a lot of time. It's like low lift, that tongue scraping. And I will add pairing that with having a cup of warm water. We did an episode back, episode 14. We talked about 5 simple ways to just start integrating Ayurveda into your daily life. And after we did that episode, I thought, oh, we didn't talk about tongue scraping and like scrape your tongue and have a glass of warm water afterwards, and how that can be so powerful for getting things moving and waking up digestion, stimulating digestion. So I'm glad we did a whole episode on that and can leave people with this, because I think it's something where if that's all you do, like if Ayurveda feels really overwhelming and you're like, I'm going to start scraping my tongue and drinking a warm cup of water in the morning, that can make such a difference.
Yeah,
truly.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. Well, how badly do you want to go look at your tongue right now?
I imagine people have already. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anything else on this topic that feels helpful to talk about that we haven't yet, or anything we missed?
I mean, this feels complete to me. I think it's hopefully a good starting point for people, and hopefully something that people can be curious about and learn a little bit more. And always something where if you are seeing something concerning and you do want to work with a clinician on that, that is always an option. And whether it's me or Brittni or somebody else, I think Ayurveda is something that so beautifully can be something you learn on your own, and also can feel really supportive to have someone guide you in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So stay curious about your tongue, because it's always changing, and let us know what you find.
Yeah. This would be a fun one to hear from people on.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if you share any photos, we're going to be looking.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Rita.
Yeah. Thanks, Brittni. This was fun.
If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us and help support our work if you'd like, share, leave a review, as well as subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you use. If you're looking for more connection or would like to support this podcast, we'd love to have you join our Patreon for $5 a month. Here you'll get bonus episodes and access to our community chat Q&A.
And don't forget to check out our wellness library, which is filled with self-guided classes, kitchen tutorials, herbal recipes, and more Ayurvedic practices, all for just $5 a month. Thanks so much for being here with us. Until next time, be well.